Hello guys. You are on the channel Alice Reddit Stories. Enjoy watching. I discovered my boss is actively cheating on his wife with a client of ours. My boss is an attorney and our office is solely comprised of just him and me. Key players, names have been changed for obvious reasons. Mark, my boss Jen, his wife Stacy, Mark's mistress OP, stuck in the middle of all this bullshit. My relationship with Mark and Jen. I've worked for Mark and Jen for 5 years now. They treat me like one of their own, invite me to dinners with them and their family, host me for holidays as my relationship with my family is strained, and treat me to vacations. My boss is an attorney and our office is solely comprised of just him and me. Mark and Jen share 4 children who are around my age. I know them all and occasionally hang out with 2 of the 4 children. Stacy. In 2018, Stacy came to us to help her deal with getting a restraining order against her then fiancé, father of her latest child. Dan is a practicing attorney across the country, and he would travel back and forth while in the relationship with Stacy. When we took on her case, it was hard to find Dan as he was in another state to serve him with the request. Stacy was also previously married to a man, Steve, and had 2 children from that marriage that ended ironically because Stacy's first husband cheated on her. During our efforts in litigating Stacy's case, Child Protective Services took jurisdiction of her case, removed all 3 children from Stacy, and held a hearing until there was an exit order in June 2020. Upon the issuance of the exit order, CPS and the court returned the children to Stacy. During this entire bit, Stacy's first husband took it upon himself to stop paying her support. This all ties in, while the children were in his custody temporarily. Fast forward to October 2021. Stacy and her new attorney are in court attempting to get a reissuance of the restraining order on Dan. My boss happened to be in the same courtroom that day and offered his services to help since we had experience with Dan evading service. My boss successfully gets the new order reissued. This is where things start to get a little fishy. After obtaining the new restraining order for Stacy, Mark would meet with her for lunch. I figured no big deal as he was informing me that we were taking her back on as a client to help her deal with Steve. But the lunch meetings were held at times Mark was supposed to be working with another client. Instead, he would leave me to work with that client and meet Stacy. Stacy had issues with Steve returning the children from visiting their father after the holidays and reached out to Mark to handle it. He did, and the children were returned to her. I should note that Mark and I are currently working out of his home office. I see Jen daily as I have a key to their house, always have, since we work in their house and only rent conference room space when we need it. This situation has been going on since the beginning of the pandemic when we turned virtual. Thereafter, Stacy and Mark have been meeting after office hours for long durations of time under the guise that Mark is going to go in for a modification to the support orders since Steve stopped paying Stacy when the CPS case was going on and continued to only pay her partially what was owed. Stacy and Mark would meet for hours at a time with little to no work product produced. I was already suspicious that something fishy was going on, but it wasn't until recently, middle of April, that I really started to notice strange behavior. Mark asked that I meet with Stacy to work out a few items on her case because he was tied up in court. When he finished, he took Stacy and me out to lunch, and during it they were flirting heavily with one another. I'm used to Mark flirting in front of me with his wife, never clients. I felt uncomfortable but brushed it off as it just being Mark, although I had my suspicions something weird was already going on. At this point, when Stacy and Mark would meet, Mark insisted on using an office near the conference room from the business center we rented from because it offered more privacy. The office has a locking door whereas the conference room has glass-paneled walls. Later, Mark went on a weekend trip with his brothers. On the trip, he apparently brought things back for Stacy and her kids. I was made aware of this when Mark had me meet Stacy to put things together for her case last week. She told me about the gifts that Mark bought her kids and gave me thank you notes to give them to Mark on her behalf since I would be seeing him. The next day Mark and I were in trial on another matter. While sitting next to Mark, a text from Stacy came in and it said, "Hey handsome, have a great day." He immediately swiped the message away. Friday Mark asked me to recruit another colleague of ours to help us put work product together. You know, since they've been spending so much time together not getting anything done. I did, and the attorney agreed. Monday the attorney called us and said they would handle the filing. Mark said he was taking on Stacy's case pro bono but would pay the new attorney $250 out of pocket and take care of the costs. Tuesday I was working at our office late with another client. Mark went into the private office to work on other matters. At 5:15 p.m. Stacy walked in, all done up, and was surprised to see me. She apologized for only having 2 coffees. Presumably she didn't know I was supposed to be there. At this point, it doesn't make much sense for Stacy or Mark to be working together today, as we have passed off the majority of her case to the other attorney to work on. I walk Stacy to the room Mark's in and go to the conference room. The room they're in is visible from where I'm at. I see Mark get up and close the blinds. 20 minutes later, Stacy emerges from the room, head down, and immediately heads to the bathroom. 5 or less minutes or so Mark leaves the room and goes to the bathroom himself. I'm still working with another client. Stacy and Mark return to the room and retrieve their belongings. Mark comes into the conference room and announces to me that he and Stacy were going to grab a cup of coffee, but she literally brought him a cup? Already uneasy about the entire situation, I wave him off. 2.5 hours later, Mark calls me and asks if I was still working with our client. I said I was, and he said he was still in the area and that he would head back up to help. The area our conference room office area is surrounded by hotel rooms. I figured it was strange he was still in the area after had left close to 3 hours ago. The next morning, yesterday, I walked into Jen and Mark's house. Mark seemingly made it a point to ask me, loudly I might add, what time we left the office last night after working with our client. I felt it strange but played along and answered. Thereafter he left to go to another meeting. During his time out of the house, Jen walked into the office and had some things to talk to me about. She casually dropped during this conversation that her and Mark's plans to go to their vacation home might be derailed by a case he will have to try. Nothing has come up that I know of, and that she will be going to the house alone until Mark can meet her. I got an uneasy feeling as Mark wasn't the type to stay home alone. Last summer when Jen went away to the vacation home a week before he was scheduled to leave, Mark recruited other people to handle his work calendar and left 2 days after his wife did to meet her cause he couldn't be alone. Today is where my suspicions have been confirmed. Mark and I were on client calls all morning. When he was on a Zoom, he handed me the phone to simultaneously deal with another. I took this opportunity to look through his messages to see if I could find something. Texts between him and Stacy were deleted. Suspicious. When Mark decided to take Jen out for breakfast, it came to me to look at his iPad because chances are he probably didn't delete the messages there. While he was out, I turned on his iPad, and lo and behold, the messages between Mark and Stacy were there. It didn't take long for me to scroll through to have my suspicions confirmed. Mark and Stacy are having an affair. I feel horrible. How am I supposed to work with Mark and be around Jen and deal with Stacy and continue to feign ignorance? I have no idea what to do or how to even approach this. Part of me wants to leave my job and cut ties with Mark and Jen and let this happen without me being around it or witness to any of it. I feel terrible as Jen is unassuming. I'm disappointed in Mark. He was my mentor. I held so much respect for him, and now all I feel is disgust, betrayal, and disappointment. I never would have thought he would throw 25 years away with Jen like this. The way he talks about her has made me feel blindsided, as I never would have thought in a million years he would do this. I have no idea how to proceed with this information, whether or not I should involve myself further or just keep quiet. But I don't want to be around it or Mark anymore, or at least limit my interactions with only work-related things and completely cut myself off from him, Jen, and his family socially. It's been a rough couple of months. Following the discovery of Mark's infidelity, I took a day off. Had a doctor's app scheduled for the Monday following, and my doctor was the absolute best. When they asked me how I was doing, I broke down in their office. They offered to give me 4 days of medical leave, which I took. As an aside, talk to your medical professionals when dealing with stress. You never know what tricks they have up their sleeve. The last month has been filled with Mark still playing Crusader/White Knight for Stacy and Jen asking me if I know what's up with Mark, as his temper noticeably was getting out of hand. Tensions were high in the house. I tried to find ways to subtly tell Jen about the indiscretion, or at least raise my concerns about this case. Jen did not get the hints, which in all fairness, if this isn't something she is suspecting, she wouldn't have. I spent the last month getting my ducks in a row to be able to leave my position without detrimental blowback, which consisted of contacting other firms who have attempted to poach me, applying to government positions, LOL, updating my resume, scheduling calls with recruiters that permanently place people in my position, getting the ball rolling on my applications to continue education, etc. Decided it was best to leave ASAP even if I didn't have a position lined up, as I couldn't take it anymore. My attitude noticeably changed while in the office and working in general. Mark made a few comments here and there, and I brushed him off, not wanting to talk to him about it. I also noticed Mark's attachment to his phone was stronger than ever. However, there was a weird shift. During this time, he must have become emboldened in his approach. He started to take calls from Stacy in front of me, where she would answer "what's cooking, good looking," or some other bullshit chime. He would tell me to work remote on some days, for me to later find out from Jen he was in court when usually I accompany him. And other details I won't bore you all with. A tense lunch with Mark and Jen, more texts of the same between Mark and Stacy, etc. To fast forward through the bullshit, this week Jen left to go to the vacation home. And immediately my heart sunk, as I knew it essentially gave Mark free rein to continue his bullshit. That morning before Jen's departure, Mark had his phone on the desk, the one we share in his home office, in front of me, open to messages from Stacy, which were apparently flirtatious in nature. The last week has been really charged, lots of tension in the house and between Mark and clients. There was a blow-up with respect to a client and a complex case, and I spent most of my day trying to mitigate the hellfire that ensued. After leaving the office yesterday with my ears ringing from all the yelling, I texted Jen to ask her if she could call me when she had the chance. She called me this morning. My initial intent on the call was to air my concerns with how it's becoming more increasingly difficult to work for Mark, given I had already planned to turn in my resignation this Friday. After briefing her as to what happened, she asked me how I was doing and how I felt with respect to work. I broke down and told her I had my suspicions the relationship wasn't appropriate between Mark and Stacy, provided her some examples, and said I saw some messages while in trial and the day she left that alarmed me. Jen is a saint. During the call she thanked me for telling her, apologized for me having to me in the middle, said she needed time to absorb and figure out how to approach Mark with this information without telling him I was the one that tipped her off. She said she also supported me and my decision to do my own thing and leave if that's what I wanted to do. During the call, Jen was more concerned about my well-being than Mark, and it breaks my heart that she acted so maternal in this entire situation as I was bawling on the phone. So that's where it's at. I told Jen, I am looking for new positions and I am trying to figure out if I should provide my resignation Friday as per my initial plan or wait until I find a new position. TLDR, I told Jen of Mark's infidelity, and she is supportive of me leaving my current position. Update. First, I want to preface this by saying that the court of public opinion is very harsh. It's much easier to cast judgment and opinions when you are sitting behind a screen reading about the real lives of people who are all emotionally invested in a situation that eventually led to the demise of the life they all thought they were living. So, I implore you all to read this update with empathy and an open mind to the decisions of all involved. Whether or not you agree with what is going on or how things are being handled, all I ask, and I know this is a tall order for Reddit, is that you all just respect the decisions that are being made. Second, for obvious reasons, names, and ages, for that matter, were changed for privacy reasons. I also tried to stay vague with the locations of where this was happening. I received some comments that believed this entire ordeal was just an exercise in creative writing. I am aware that the original post, the subsequent one, and this post itself come off as a bit salacious. But you all have to understand that none of this is made up. It is very much real, and unfortunately, very common in the large municipality we live in. Third, this deals with people, mainly Mark, who have deep-rooted wounds that they never really healed. Like all of us, Mark has a past that affects how he copes with turmoil/loss/abandonment/etc. All of that, coupled with issues that were culminating over the last 2 years thanks COVID/life and the type of person Stacy is, made this a perfect recipe for infidelity. Now I am in no way saying any of that excuses what Mark chose to do, and keep doing. And it definitely does not excuse it, but it explains it, and Jen has owned up to her own part of where the relationship drifted off course. Mark and Jen have been together for much longer than I have been alive, and that is a relationship that, too, has a history, more than any of us know. And I'm telling you all, as I told Jen, that is not my place to have an opinion as to how they are choosing to handle it. I respect Jen, Mark, not so much, and I can understand her decision in all of this. As cliché as it sounds, this truly resulted from a lack of communication and effort to be vulnerable and transparent with your partner. Now that all of this preamble is out of the way, here's the update you've all been waiting for. I thank you all for being patient. I have been debating on whether or not I should be updating at all. It's still relatively early, you'll understand what I mean further on, and there are still variables that are unknown/predictable, mainly Stacy. It's been a whirlwind of a summer, so I will try to recount everything to the best of my ability following my phone conversation with Jen that ultimately informed her of Mark's wrongdoing. Late June. Jen had made the decision to confront Mark immediately following my phone call to her. Up until this point, I told her I didn't feel like his relationship with Stacy was appropriate but did not disclose that I knew he had slept with her. Prior to confronting Mark, Jen had said she needed to think of a way to bring this up to Mark without him losing his shit or burning me out for telling him. Following our call, Jen rings up Mark and tells him an anonymous caller said his relationship with Stacy was inappropriate. I could hear the muffled conversation as Mark had taken this call in the other room while I was working in the office. Naturally, Mark denied any allegations, and Jen met his denials with an ultimatum. Mark dumps the case immediately, or their relationship was over. Following that call, Mark entered the room I was in and disclosed to me the call that had just occurred. It was painful to keep eye contact or some sort of poker face with him as he couldn't believe that an anonymous caller had done this. Surely I thought Mark wasn't that stupid, and he would infer it was me who called Jen. I naturally tried to deflect from me and state other parties who could have done such a thing, as Stay's case with Steve was highly acrimonious. Mark sat there in total disbelief that his affair had been discovered, still contending that there was nothing going on and that he refused to get off the case. Mark then spent the next few days trying to figure out who called Jen. She told him it was an unknown number, and when she tried to dial back after the call, she was then blocked, and vacillating between refusing to get off the case or trying to transition the case to another attorney, so Stacy wasn't completely SOL. Ultimately, after a few days of his buffoonery, Mark transitioned the case to another attorney. Mark then openly held any and all, or seemingly all, communications with Stacy in my presence. Jen demanded to see the messages between Mark and Stacy, as Mark still held that nothing occurred aside from harmless flirting. Mark stated the messages had been deleted. Jen said he could contact his phone provider and retrieve them. During their back and forth, as Jen was at their vacation home and Mark was still back here, Jen would confront Mark's lies with the information I provided her. And still, Mark held that there was no inappropriate relationship, just the flirting. Jen told Mark she forgave him for the worst he could have done, but for their relationship to work and they mend the relationship, Mark needed to provide the messages and be completely forthright with her, or their relationship was over. She told Mark he better not come to their second home, thinking that none of this was going to be resolved. Otherwise, he shouldn't come and he should expect divorce papers. Prior to his departure, Jen and I spoke on the phone once more. During this call, I told Jen if Mark refuses to get the deleted messages from his phone provider, then she should check his iPad for them. She said she had already thought about that. I disclosed more of what I observed and tried to impress upon her without outright saying I saw messages that confirmed that he did step out of the relationship, that Mark slept with Stacy. Jen's response at this time was that she could not confront Mark with that belief as there was no hard evidence, and so there was no way to pin Mark down with that. Mark is a skilled trial attorney, so of course, he is going to deny unless there's something that directly points to him actually fucking Stacy. Circumstantial evidence, even strong, will never be enough to get Mark to cop to the shit he did. This was the last I spoke to Jen aside from texts from her checking in on me until they got back this past week. In the days leading up to Mark's travels, he was asking me about Stacy and why I didn't like her. This man truly didn't make the connection between my anger toward him and my hatred toward Stacy while all of this was going on. He initially was saying stuff like he was ready for a divorce and then quickly changed his tune to, "I'm not throwing my marriage away for Stacy." July-September. While Mark and Jen were away working on their relationship, Mark was working remotely, and I was dealing with the practice and handling most day-to-day client issues. Mark and I were in constant contact, and his demeanor toward me did not change, so I was still under the impression that he had no indication that I was the whistleblower. I had been working with a legal recruiter to find permanent placement and go to a firm that was willing to pay me close to the salary I was making. This proved to be hard, as most firms do not pay their legal assistants the amount I am making, and the firms that would pay close to it would be firms that hate my boss or have issues with him. Even though Mark did a shitty thing, I couldn't live with myself jumping to another firm that Mark dealt with on a daily basis that did not like him. Or work for a partner/attorney that hated Mark and would let their disdain for him be the driving force behind them poaching me. My recruiter was having difficulty finding firms that fit that requirement for me, and the ones that were left would leave me to take a 20-30K a year pay cut. That's something I just financially couldn't do. I essentially left it open with the recruiter to find the perfect placement, but now that Jen knew, there wasn't much pressure for me to leave my current position/job. Now what occurred during those months between Jen and Mark was all discussed with me after it occurred. As I stated earlier, Mark and Jen just got back. Jen and I spent the last 2 days discussing what happened at their second home. The first thing Jen told me when I saw her in person was, "Mark knows you were the one who told me." Sheer panic fell over my face as I was now standing in the office across from Jen with Mark in the other room, not knowing what to expect. She said he's known it was you since July, which eased my concerns a bit as I stated Mark and I had been in constant contact while he was away, and his demeanor toward me was normal. Jen then went on to tell me the following. Mark still held the position that nothing inappropriate occurred, even up until he got there. At one point, Mark asked Jen if she was really going to believe an anonymous caller over him, her husband. I found this super manipulative, and I'm sure Jen did too. Out of sheer anger, she responded that he was fucking stupid and that it was me who told her, and that I had no reason to lie to her, as I wouldn't do that. Mark was obviously upset, as during his discussions with Jen, prior to him going to their second home, he was trying to use me, unknowingly, that I was the one that was feeding Jen the information, as an excuse, and would tell Jen things like ask OP she was there, she could confirm it. Mark apparently was angered at me, and his anger did not subside until Jen told Mark that I did the right thing, and if it wasn't for me telling her and it coming out this way, their relationship would not stand a chance. If Jen would have ultimately found out when they were back home, this would have immediately led to a divorce. Jen contends that I saved their marriage, and them being away from everyone and everything at their second home afforded them the opportunity to really discuss the issues they were having that led up to Mark's infidelity. So I'm not sure what was going through Mark's head. Whether he truly believed he was slick about the infidelity to a point that I was too oblivious to catch on, which is highly offensive to me, as I've stated he knows how observant I am thanks trauma, or that my loyalties lied with him and he thought I just would never tell Jen. I'm unclear if this part occurred before or after Mark found out I was the one who told Jen. But ultimately, the truth ended up coming out completely as Jen went through Mark's iPad and read the messages between him and Stacy. Jen was able to scroll back and see mostly everything, and assumingly read the same messages that I did that confirmed the relationship between Mark and Stacy was physical. She told me she lost her shit. She threw the iPad at Mark and told him to fucking leave, that she did not care where he went, but she wanted him out. Evidently, that didn't happen, as Mark stayed and disclosed everything to Jen. Now that there was direct evidence pointing to his wrongdoing, Mark had nothing to hide behind, and Jen believes he disclosed all the details. Mark owned up to the affair and answered every question, whether truthfully or not, Jen had for him. As I mentioned, it was a culmination of things, but it really boiled down to a lack of communication, Mark's fragile ego, and a much younger, attractive plaything that fed into Mark's savior complex/ego. He had someone that doted on him at a point in time when Mark wasn't getting that external validation from his wife or his family. And he needed that. Jen said she knew Mark was insecure, and he handles himself from a place of insecurity and operates with a heavy abandonment wound. Again, affirming this doesn't justify nor excuse his stupidity, but she also disclosed personal details that added to the deterioration of the relationship. And as I mentioned, also took accountability for her part in it. Following his disclosure, Mark suggested he and Jen go to counseling. After sitting on that, Jen said she didn't believe that it would be beneficial, as a therapist could not tell them something about their 25-plus-year relationship they didn't already know. She also knew Mark would not be fully transparent with a therapist, so she deemed it a waste of time. If they couldn't work this out between them, then the relationship had no bearings to hold together. Mark has cut Stacy completely off, blocked her from all his devices, and ignored every email following his departure to their vacation home. Stacy has attempted to contact Mark a few times, and when he didn't respond, she then tried to contact me. I was obviously very short with her, and my last message to her was to essentially fuck off, and told her to ask her current attorney if she had any questions about her case. Jen has made it clear to Mark that if Stacy publicly outs their relationship or turns up pregnant, Jen is out. Jen refuses to sit in that humiliation with Mark and the downfall that would ensue, how it would affect their livelihood, and how it would affect their children. Jen told Mark she would take him for half of what he is worth and let Stacy take what's left. Mark still doesn't believe Stacy is a threat, nor does he understand that Stacy holds some power over him that could destroy him. Stacy may have been directing Mark to delete their messages, but it doesn't mean she did, and Mark isn't making that connection. For a smart guy, he really is being stupid about Stacy and underplaying the threat she potentially could be. Mark had no foresight when it comes to Stacy. Jen goes back and forth between being angry with Mark and taking pity on him cause she knows that he was targeted by Stacy. She still holds love for him and is deeply hurt that he not only stepped out of the relationship but continued to lie about it and cover it up after she initially confronted him. She also does not want to break up their family. Jen, on some level, has also stated that she doesn't want Stacy to win, as she refuses to let some tart waltz into her life and take from her what she painstakingly built. Like me, Jen has told me the respect she had for Mark was gone, and she is not sure if that would ever come back. But as I stated, she has love for Mark, and their relationship has a history that you, dear reader, nor I know of. She disclosed that never in their 25-plus-year relationship would she have thought that Mark would have done this. If she hadn't read the messages herself, she wouldn't have believed it. Mark was always faithful, and both he and Jen had ample opportunities to step out of the relationship, but they always managed to choose each other. This time that didn't happen. Jen had removed all leeway and trust she had for Mark, rightfully so, and at his own undoing. Mark is trying to stay in Jen's good graces and is doing all that he can to cure his fuck-up. He is mortified. Jen has all of these conditions she is placing on Mark that she is not waver from, nor is she willing to let go of. E.g., never going to the restaurants that Mark took Stacy to, never getting in one of the cars he drove Stacy in, leaving the building of the office we virtually rent, etc. Out of curiosity, I looked up Stacy's case to see where her case with Steve stands. They settled to have Steve increase support $300 a month. Part of me knows that there is no fucking way Stacy is going to go away quietly, especially given that Mark has iced her out and she did all of this that potentially ruined a marriage for only $300 more. What's unfortunate is that if Stacy would have gotten a job, she would be making more than that, but she chose to get involved with a married man for her benefit. On some level, both Jen and I have agreed that we hope that Stacy does make a fuss to put Mark in his place and teach him a lesson. It would only serve him right, but again we still hold so much love for him and don't want to see our own financial downfall from this. Jen has asked me to stay, although she said she fully supports whatever decision I choose to make. Mark has also asked me to stay, citing he still loves me like a daughter and that all is well between us. He also wanted to talk to me in depth about it, assuming to apologize. Mark and I have not yet had this discussion. So that's that. As I stated, this may be the last update unless Stacy rears her ugly head and deems that the extra $300 isn't enough. If there's anything of substance that follows this update, I will likely add it to my page as opposed to posting. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel. There are many interesting stories ahead of you.